Chapter 0, Counted. Talent is born, not made. That is what the strong believe, and the strong write the rules. I grew up in a world of mountains, and the mountains were crowded with martial sects, and the sects lived by one law, that a man drew essence into his body and climbed the realms by strength, and that strength decided everything. The realms went tempering, Wellspring, Foundation, Core, Ascendant, and the strong ruled all of them. At the bottom were boys like me, charity disciples, orphans taken in out of pity, and set to fetch water and carry firewood for the sect's true sons. They called me the Ash Boy. For 2 years I was stuck at the second tempering, while boys my age climbed past me without looking down, and I learned that my place was to serve, not to rise. The world had an answer for boys like me, and it was a comfortable one. Effort, the strong said, was simply what the talentless did instead of succeeding. The gifted ascended, the rest worked themselves raw and got nowhere, and that was only proof that they had been born with nothing. The trash never rose. I believed it too. I had 2 years of carrying water to prove it. And then, on the worst night of my life, something woke behind my eyes that did the one thing no one in that whole world ever did. It counted. It counted every honest drop of sweat and paid it back 100-fold, straight into my cultivation, breaking walls that 2 years of plain effort had never moved. It counted what no one else had ever bothered to count. And it showed me the flaw in any technique I watched even once, so that I never trained wrong and never wasted a breath. The strong had sworn my whole life that stubborn, unglamorous work was worthless. They were wrong. It turned out that work, counted true, was the only thing that had ever mattered, and that the line of cultivators who once knew it had been hunted down and drowned for saying so out loud. But that is a story for later, and there is a great deal of it. I was the waste of the Greycairn Sect, and on the night they locked me in the Woodshed to die, I began, for the first time in my life, to be counted. Chapter 1, Ash. I had carried water up the Greycairn steps every dawn for 2 years, and there were always 900 of them. I stood by the well in the grey light, the leather yoke biting into my raw shoulders as I hauled another bucket up from the dark. The cold metal clinked against the stone, echoing across the empty courtyard. My patched grey robe was a poor thing beside the clean robes of the real disciples who sauntered past me with mock indifference, as if I were one more piece of the wall. 2 years and not much had changed. I still fetched water and carried firewood for those whose stations far surpassed mine. While others climbed the realms like steps in a staircase, Roderick, the sect heir, had gone from the first to the 5th tempering in a little over a year. I was stuck at the second tempering, a wall that mocked every drop of effort I poured at it. The courtyard emptied as the morning thinned. I shouldered the yoke and trudged across the cold flagstones toward the ashen court. The herbalist's apprentice, Myra, was waiting at the top of the steps with a small basket of herbs, and she met my eyes with a knowing look. "Eat," she said, pressing a heel of bread into my hand, "and keep your head down today. Roderick's in a mood." I nodded and tucked the bread into my robe. The assessment was today, and Elder Sorrel would judge whether I had made any progress since last month. I already knew the answer. I climbed the steps anyway, one at a time, the weight of 2 years pressing down on my shoulders. The ashen court was a stone expanse of columns and iron-hooked lanterns, the air thick with pine and wood smoke. Disciples in grey milled at its edges, their faces marked with anticipation or dread. Elder Sorrel stood at the center, one hand resting on the measuring stone, a rough-hewn slab that showed a cultivator's realm when palm met stone. The court fell quiet as I stepped forward. The stone was cold beneath my hand. I focused, pulling essence from within and pouring it through my palm, willing it past the wall that had held me for 2 years. It flowed into the stone, and the stone showed nothing. No change, no breakthrough. "Second tempering," Elder Sorrel called, in her dry, bored voice. The court rippled with murmurs and snickers. I felt the sting of their eyes as I stepped away, my shoulders dropping. Roderick strolled into view, robes pristine, smile already in place. 2 years at the second tempering," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Even charity has to end somewhere. The sect doesn't feed stones." His laughter bounced off the walls. Then he stepped to the stone himself, and essence flared around him, graceful and effortless, the fifth tempering, a prodigy beyond any doubt. He could have stopped there, satisfied with the showing. Instead, he turned to Elder Sorrel, still smirking, and gestured at me as though brushing off a stain. "His charity place," he said. "The Ash Boy's been nothing but a waste of the sect's rice. Strike it, today." A gasp moved through the court. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my anger behind my teeth. Elder Sorrel hesitated, glanced at me, and looked away. "Very well," he said slowly. "It will be reviewed." It was the same as a yes, and everyone knew it. I left the Ashen Court with my head down and my path clear for Roderick to find me. He found me with two of his cronies behind the court. Disrespected was the pretext, me meeting his eyes while he belittled me. A week ago I would have flinched before he could sneer. Not today. "You're trash," Roderick said, "and you know it." I met his gaze without blinking. His cronies snickered and tightened their grips on staff and fist. "Let's see if you still feel so tough when this is over." With a sharp gesture, they moved in. The first blow caught me across the jaw and spun me onto my side. Blood filled my mouth. I spat it out. A boot found my ribs and the air went out of me. My vision blurred, but I forced myself back up to a crouch because staying down felt too much like agreeing with them. Pain fled again as a fist drove into my side. I gasped and refused to cry out, refused to plead. Begging was the one thing they could not take from me. Roderick pressed a foot into my back to hold me down while the others took their turns, punches and kicks at ribs and stomach and face, everywhere that would hurt but not kill. The staff came down across my back, sparing and deliberate, enough to leave welts. I tried to push up once and got an elbow in the gut for it. "Stay down," Roderick growled. "Show some respect." And somewhere under the pain, a cold rage began to seethe. Not fear, not even hurt, just an ice-cold anger at every blow that landed. Eventually they stopped. Nothing was broken. They hauled me up by my collar and arms and half-dragged me across the grounds to the woodshed at the far edge, a small stone hut full of split logs and frost, used for nothing but kindling. The door creaked open and they shoved me inside. I caught myself before I fell. "Stay in there till you learn your place," Roderick said, swinging the door shut between us. "If the cold teaches you first, well, the sect doesn't feed stones." The bar dropped into place with a dull thud. I heard their footsteps recede down the path, and the cold closed in around me. The night air bit deep, crawling through the gaps in the old walls to steal the warmth from every breath. I shifted, gingerly, feeling the ache of bruised ribs and the sting of a split lip. Movement hurt, but movement was warmer than stillness, and I knew from hard experience that lying still in the cold could turn a man to ice before morning. So I forced myself to stand, bracing against the pain, and I did the only thing I knew how to do when there was nothing else to do. The form old Bram had taught me years ago was simple: breathe deep, breathe slow, raise the arms, lower them. He had drilled it into me as a way to keep warm on long nights with a short fire. Now it felt like dragging my limbs through ice-cold water. I did it anyway. I ran the form not because I believed in it, but because moving was warmer than dying. Each breath brought fresh pain, each motion a new ache. But my body began to warm, the muscles loosening into the old rhythm, and my mind began to clear. And then something changed. A line of plain, cold text appeared behind my eyes, a count of some kind, tracking my effort, numbers I felt more than read. I froze, staring into the dark where a moment ago there had been only pain and cold. What was this thing that counted? Why now? The woodshed stayed silent around me. The cold pressed back in, but behind my eyes something had woken, and it was watching, and it was counting. Honest effort counted. Experience multiplied 100-fold. The ledger is open. Chapter 2, The Ledger. I stood very still in the dark and read the words that no one else in the world could see. It was counting the one thing the whole world had told me did not count. I read the 3 lines again. Honest effort counted. Experience multiplied 100-fold. The ledger is open. And skepticism gripped me like a fist. The implications were staggering, and staggering things were how a desperate boy got himself killed. So I tested it. I set my bare feet on the cold floor of the woodshed, took up the breathing and stance form, and ran one slow, deliberate cycle, holding each pose until the burn in my legs threatened to topple me. The first cycle finished. My muscles ached, and my skin glistened with sweat despite the cold. Honest effort counted. I repeated the sequence, pushing just past my usual limit. Experience multiplied 100-fold. Each repetition brought another acknowledgement. I could feel the essence coursing through me like liquid fire, and still, the count kept pace with every breath, every stance, tallying what I gave it and handing it back 100 times larger. The woodshed's thin walls creaked around me as my body shook with the effort. This thing was real. It was measuring my sweat, the exact thing the sect had spent 2 years telling me was worthless, and paying it back 100-fold. It was counting the one thing no one had ever bothered to count. I pushed harder, driven by a cold clarity I had never felt before. I held a stance until tremors racked me and my muscles begged for mercy, and as I held it, I felt the multiplied effort gather and press against the barrier of the second tempering, the same wall that had not shifted in 2 years of ordinary work, the boulder that had slid every ounce of my effort off its face without a scratch. I pushed into it the way old Bram had taught me, forcing essence through narrowed channels until it had nowhere to go but forward. And this time, fed by the 100-fold count, the wall gave. Essence flooded my limbs with a heat that seared through muscle and bone, widening the channels in ways I could barely follow. My body remade itself a degree, grounding me even as it lifted me. 2 years of effort had not moved this wall. One night of effort, counted 100-fold, broke it like a frozen branch. Second tempering, barrier broken. Third tempering reached. I did not stop. The cold floor was forgotten, replaced by the warmth of exertion and the count climbing steadily behind my eyes. Each stance held past failure, each form repeated until it was clean, every breath cycled through aching limbs, each honest scrap of work counted, multiplied, and fed straight into my cultivation like water into a reservoir that refused to overflow. The third tempering gave way, and then the fourth, each barrier yielding to an effort no ordinary disciple could have spent in a year, let alone a single night. The numbers climbed higher and faster than I could believe, and the world seemed to open in front of me one wall at a time. By the fifth, exhaustion was creeping into my limbs, and still I pressed on. Sweat poured down my face and pooled along the floorboards, freezing there as the night deepened. My arms trembled. The channels in my body had begun to scream for relief. Fifth tempering reached. The sixth tempering loomed ahead, its resistance palpable and unyielding, and when I struck at it with my 100-fold effort, my vision grayed at the edges, and a sharp pain spiked through my temples. The ledger reported it plainly, and in that moment I understood the whole shape of the truth. The ledger could count my effort 100-fold. It could not make my body more than a body. I sank onto the cold floor, shaking. The count settled at the sixth tempering, and my body spent, trembling as though I had aged a decade in a single night. I had done what should have taken years, and the body had sent me the bill before the night was out. The power was not free. Some part of me had always known a thing like this would not be free. I lay there, breathless, staring at the floorboards that had borne witness to my climb, and waited for the dawn and for the old man who would come with it. The woodshed door creaked open just as the grey light reached the cracks in the walls, and a tall silhouette filled the frame. Old Bram, the stooped, disregarded keeper of the shed and the sect's dead archive, stepped inside, plainly expecting to drag out a frozen corpse. He stopped when he saw me, soaked through with frozen sweat, alive, and several stages stronger than the ash boy he had locked away the night before. "Thought you'd be frozen solid," he muttered, setting down his lantern to see me better. "I'm alive," I managed. My voice came out a cracked whisper. He knelt beside me, 2 fingers at my pulse, and his eyes narrowed, not in surprise, exactly, but in the way of a man quietly fitting pieces together that he did not like the shape of. He nodded slowly and rose. "You're stronger," he said, "not just in spirit, in essence. I don't know who you were yesterday, but this isn't the boy I barred that door on." I couldn't explain it, and I wasn't going to try. The ledger was mine, and a secret like that, spoken aloud in a place like this, would only bring me scrutiny or a knife or worse. I said nothing and let him help me to my feet. His grip tightened on my arm before he let go. "Whatever you've found, boy," he said, low and serious, "the sect will not love you for it. It will open you up to see how you work. Hide it, get strong first, then we'll talk." Chapter 3, Hundredfold. Bram got my cot and my rice bowl back without a word about how, and by noon I was carrying water up the 900 steps again. The work that had been my punishment for 2 years was, to the ledger, simply effort, and effort was the one thing it paid for. I shuffled through the courtyard with the water yoke over my shoulders, its wooden frame rough against my skin, the weight familiar as an old insult. Yet today it felt different. Each trip to the well and back ticked the hundredfold count higher in my vision, a quiet, steady reminder that what had been mere drudgery was now fueling my climb. Honest effort counted. The other disciples paid me no mind, treating me like an inconsequential speck of ash swept up by the wind. They saw the same shuffling charity boy they always had. They did not see the count behind my eyes, or the calluses on my palms turning into something the ledger valued more than any of them valued me. Experience multiplied 100-fold. The yoke seemed to lighten as I worked, though my arms trembled by the last trip. I set the final buckets down with a quiet, private triumph and watched the count reset for the next round of chores. It was a grim joke that the very labor meant to grind me down was now the thing lifting me up. But I would keep it close, building behind the Ash Boy's mask, until the day came to stop hiding. That evening, I learned the ledger could do more than count. The training yard was nearly empty, only the senior disciple Harlan running the falling ash form for a knot of juniors, his blade slicing the cooling air like autumn leaves coming down. Each cut was precise and practiced, but as I watched, the ledger did something new. The whole technique unspooled in my sight, every line and curve of it laid bare, and on the third cut something faltered. A hitch in his wrist, a small inefficiency that bled essence and slowed the blade. It was nearly invisible. To me, it stood out like a crack running through a wall. Technique observed, falling ash form. One flaw found. I had watched Harlan run that form 100 times and seen nothing. Now I saw the one flaw in it as plainly as a crack in a wall. "Practice this until you can do it without a single mistake," Harlan told the juniors, sheathing his sword. They began their repetitions. I joined them, mimicking his form exactly, flaw and all, because the Ash Boy was not allowed to be better than a senior. Each clumsy copy was a promise to myself. When I was out of their sight, I would correct it. That night I took a rapt practice blade back to the woodshed, the narrow chamber of shadows that had become my whole world after dark, and I ran the falling ash form the way it was meant to be run. I extended my arm in a fluid arc, the blade gliding through the air, and on the third cut I kept the wrist true where Harlan had let it twist. No wasted motion. The strike came out clean and fast and whole, better than the seniors, on my first honest attempt, because I was not copying a man, I was performing the technique as it had been before someone passed the hitch down the years. And the ledger counted the practice and multiplied it. The repetitions piled up, each one cleaner than the last, sweat soaking through my tunic and freezing where it dripped. The work was punishing, and it felt almost weightless, and somewhere in it, I understood the full shape of what I held. Everyone else inherited their flaws from the master above them. I inherited nothing, so I could be clean. Ordinary disciples spent years and hoarded elixirs, battering at walls they could not see, carrying down forms warped by every flawed master before them. I would never plateau and never train wrong, because the ledger turned plain sweat into power and showed me the truth of any technique I watched once. It was an extraordinary thing to hold. It was a deadly thing for a nobody to hold, and I knew it. I had barely wrapped the blade away when Myra came to the woodshed. She had a pot of salve in her hands and a wariness in her eyes. She had heard what Roderick did and come expecting to find me still broken, and found me whole instead, the bruises gone, moving easy. "Cael," she said, hesitating in the doorway, "I brought this for your bruises, but if they're truly healed." "They are," I said, Haven't felt them since yesterday. She stepped in and set the pot down, her gaze narrowing as she watched the way I stood, balanced now, sure, nothing like the flinching ash boy she knew. Myra was not stupid, and she was not easily lied to. Bruises don't heal in 3 days, Cael, she said, not letting go of the salve pot. Not yours, not anyone's, so which is it, a miracle or a lie? Neither, I said, it's just different now. She held my eyes a long moment, then let out a breath. You're not broken anymore, she said quietly, but you know that's the kind of thing that gets a nobody noticed by the wrong people here. I know, and because she had given me bread when I was nothing, I gave her the only thing I could. For now it's better if no one knows, even you only know there's something. Leave it there, it's safer. She didn't like it, but she nodded, the way one low-born outsider nods at another who's just told them the truth. She set the salve on the crate anyway. Then I'll keep an eye out, she said, for anything odd, anyone asking. She left, her footsteps fading down the path, and I was alone again with the count behind my eyes and the question of how long the mask could possibly last. Chapter 4, The Woodshed. Bram taught me the way you'd teach a dog, not to bolt, slow, low-voiced, and watching my hands the whole time. We sat in the woodshed by lamplight, the air thick with pine and the smell of old parchment he'd carried in from the archive behind it. He perched on a stack of cracked tomes, his eyes sharp as ever in a weathered face, and he did not waste time on comfort. A wall isn't a door you push, he said. It's a truth your body has to earn. Most men die on the wrong side of one, so how exactly are you on this side of yours? I had decided, somewhere on the 900 steps that day, that if I was going to trust anyone, it would be the old man who'd come to the shed expecting a corpse and help me up instead. So I told him, the thing behind my eyes that counted honest effort and paid it back 100-fold, the thing that showed me the flaw in any technique I watched once. The ledger, I said, that's what it calls itself. Bram went very still. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, exactly, more like a man hearing a word he'd buried a long time ago. He leaned back, a deep groove cutting between his brows, and for a moment he looked older than the mountains. That's why you move so clean, he said slowly, almost to himself. So different. He didn't ask me to prove it. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he reached for a battered scroll and unrolled it, and began to teach me in earnest. He traced the realms with one finger, tempering, where every breath and stance built the foundation, then Wellspring, foundation, core, each wall harder to crack than the last. Most men never pass the second or the third, he said, not because they're lazy, because a wall isn't muscle, it's understanding your body has to grow into. Push without it, and the wall pushes back harder for years. And the ones who do pass. Elixirs mostly, pills that soften the truth a little for those rich enough to buy them. Or, he said, and his eyes flicked to me, a foundation so clean there's nothing in the way but you, which almost no one ever has, because almost no one can afford to take their time. I felt the truth of it settle in my bones. It was exactly what the ledger was doing for me, and exactly why no one else could do it. Keep learning, he said abruptly, rolling the scroll shut. And be careful who you show it to. Be careful who you show me to while you're at it. Bram was more than an old shed keeper. I had begun to suspect it, now I was sure. He took me another evening into the dead archive behind the woodshed, a crumbling chamber where shelves teetered under the weight of scrolls no one had read in a generation, the air thick with mold and dust that danced in the light coming through the broken roof. It was why a disgraced keeper had been given it. Nobody else wanted to breathe in there. He showed me a corner of it, the basics of cultivation theory traced out in fading ink, instructing me to follow the characters with my finger while he explained. And then we passed a particular scroll, water-stained, its surface bearing an intricate carving that looked almost like a name in characters I didn't know. Bram's hand stopped on the scroll a moment too long, and then he moved me past it like it was nothing, which is how I knew it was something. I filed the reaction away and said nothing. The archive held more than forgotten lore, something about the deep mountains, a lineage no one spoke of. Bram had glimpsed it for an instant and stepped past, and I let him, and I added it to the small pile of things I was waiting to understand. The next morning, carrying water as always, I passed the steps where Roderick held court with his cronies. I had no intention of stopping. My ribs had healed clean, and I moved without a limp, my eyes level, and that alone was enough to offend him. "Look what crawled out from under its rock," he sneered. His friends laughed on cue. He stepped into my path, eyes narrowing, unable to leave the puzzle of a charity boy who hadn't broken. "You're still here." "Seems so," I said, and tried to go around him. He didn't like that. He threw a casual strike, a lazy backhand meant to put the ash boy back in his place, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, my hand slipped up and turned his wrist aside, clean, a reflex drilled into me by the form I ran every night. It was one small motion, but Roderick was a real prodigy, and he felt exactly what it was. "What are you?" Roderick said softly, cradling his wrist. It wasn't a question, it was a promise to find out. His cronies had gone silent. I cursed myself the whole walk back. The mask had a tear in it now, and Roderick was not a man who let a thread go unpulled. That night, in the cold corner of the woodshed that had become my sanctuary, I told Bram what had happened and what I meant to do about it. "He won't let you rise just because you can hold a stance," Bram warned. "And an open assessment, you've stayed hidden well enough so far, why throw that away?" "Because hiding only buys time," I said. "Roderick's already pulling the thread. A nobody who turns up dead in a ditch no one asks after, but a prodigy the whole sect has its eyes on, that's a harder thing to make quietly disappear." I met his gaze. "And I want answers too, about the ledger, about that scroll you walked me past. I don't get those by staying invisible." Bram ran a hand over his grizzled beard and sighed, because there was no arguing it. "A nobody who hides gets buried in the dark," I said. "A prodigy everyone's watching is harder to bury, so I stop hiding. At the next assessment, I let them all see." He didn't love it, but he nodded, and something in his eyes that was half pride and half fear settled into resolve. There would be no turning back now, and we both knew it. Chapter 5, Reassessment. The whole court remembered me failing at this stone a month ago, and I let them remember it as I walked up. The Ashen Court was a sea of robed figures under the cold morning light, their faces a mix of curiosity and disdain, and I could feel 100 eyes on me as I crossed toward the measuring stone at its center. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, carrying my old name on them like a smell, Ashboy. Myra's gaze found mine from the throng, her fists clenched tight. Old Bram stood at the far edge, rigid and watchful. Above us all, Grandmaster Thorn presided with the bored detachment of a man who had seen too many assessments to expect anything from this one. Roderick and the senior disciples sneered from their tiered platform. I felt the full weight of the moment. The only protection I had ever owned was being beneath notice, and I was about to throw it away with both hands. I set my palm to the stone, the same stone that had shown nothing a month ago. "Begin," Thorn intoned, his voice cutting the murmurs like a cold wind. I drew essence into the stone, slow and deliberate. It flickered, its surface glowing in soft ripples, and then, instead of settling at the second tempering where it had stuck for 2 years, it began to climb. Past third, fourth, fifth, the murmurs died into an eerie stillness. The stone leapt to sixth, then seventh, gathering speed, and the silence in the court turned to held breath. Elder Sorrel's hand shook as she reached to lay her own palm beside mine, testing it, disbelieving. The stone climbed one last stage and stopped, the eighth tempering, the very top of the realm, one breath from Wellspring, a leap that should take a disciple a decade. "That stone is mistaken," she said, and put her hand to it again and went pale, because the stone is never mistaken. The court erupted. Elder Sorrel stepped back, her composure gone. Grandmaster Thorn, who had not moved in years of assessments, leaned forward for the first time, his eyes sharp on me. Roderick's face twisted from a smirk into something raw. The ash boy he had thrown in a shed to die now sat one breath below his own betters, and he could not bear it. He broke decorum before anyone could stop him. "I demand a duel," he growled, his voice trembling with rage. If this is some trick, let me prove it for myself. Thorn's eyes flicked to sorrel, then back. Very well, he said. A duel can reveal a great deal. The crowd drew back from the center of the courtyard, hushed and tight with attention as Roderick and I stepped out to face each other. He drew his sword with a clatter that rang off the stone walls. First to the ground loses, he snarled. I took up a blade and breathed. I had trained for this, every line of the sect's revered forms etched clean in my mind, every flaw lit up where the ledger had shown me. Roderick wielded the falling ash form like the master everyone believed him to be, but he had never once seen the hitch buried in its third cut. He lunged first, his sword sweeping in an arc at my throat. I stepped off the line of it, and the flaw in his delivery was as plain to me as a crack in a wall. Technique observed, falling ash form, one flaw found. Come on, he taunted, recovering, shifting into a harder sequence, but the pattern was already laid bare in front of me. I knew that form better than he did. I had read the flaw in it, so when he came, I simply was not where the flaw sent him, and then he was on the ground. His blade sliced through empty air. He overcommitted, reaching for an opening that did not exist, and my counter took his balance and put him flat on the cold flagstones. The courtyard erupted in gasps. Roderick lay still a moment, shock written in every line of him, then rolled to his feet, glaring. Get up, I said quietly, and offered him my hand, because the offer cost me nothing and cost him everything. He slapped it away and spat a curse, and refusing the hand was a worse humiliation than the fall had been. The crowd watched in silence. The laughter and the taunts that had always greeted my failures were gone, replaced by a weighty stillness. The satisfaction settled in my chest like a cold, clean stone, not joy exactly, justice. He had earned every part of this, and I had earned the answer to it. Grandmaster Thorn stepped forward, his staff ringing once on the stone. Cael, he said, his low voice carrying through the silent court, you have proven yourself. You are no longer a charity cot disciple. Welcome to the true ranks. The words landed strange and warm in a chest that had braced for mockery its whole life. Myra shoved through the crowd, her grin fierce, and clapped a hand to my shoulder. Well done, she said, raw and honest. Old Bram, apart from the rest, gave me a single curt nod, and between us no words were needed. And on the high tier, one figure had not reacted like the others. Kestrel, the sect's acknowledged genius, a Wellspring prodigy from one of its highest branches, leaned forward, dark hair pulled back in a braid, watching me with cool, exact attention. Not contempt, not pity, assessment. So, he said from the high tier, unhurried, almost pleased. There's someone here after all. He let the words settle over the courtyard, and then the corner of his mouth moved. Try not to bore me, Ashboy. I met his gaze without flinching. The old name faded off me like smoke. I was no longer the charity boy who had failed at this stone. I was something the strongest disciple in the sect had just decided was worth his time. And I understood, standing there, that whatever this was, it had only just begun. Chapter 6, Wellspring. For the first time in 2 years, I slept in a bed that the sect admitted I was allowed to sleep in. I woke before dawn, the chills seeping through the real cot in my new quarters, the clean robe folded beside it a strange thing to own. My hands were wrapped in leather now, not from beatings, but from the countless hours of drilling forms until my fingers bled. Each drop of it counted. I walked to the training grounds at a steady pace, tracked the whole way by the wary glances of senior disciples who had spent 2 years not seeing me at all. The technique hall, off-limits to the Ashboy, was open to me now. Inside, a few disciples cast disdainful looks. A charity boy leaping over their heads was an insult to the order of things. I ignored them and worked, and the ledger hummed in the back of my skull, counting every ounce of sweat. Honest effort counted. Old Bram found me at the dummy, his eyes narrowing. You've been working, he said gruffly. Every day. He looked me over, and the awe and the wariness in him were about even. Your foundation's clean, too clean for your age. That's the kind of thing that gets noticed. He was right, and we both let it sit. Then he took me, that evening, to open my Wellspring. Opening the Wellspring was no small thing, the breakthrough into the second realm, where you condensed raw essence into a usable, flowing source for the first time. And how you opened it mattered forever. Most disciples, rushed or poorly taught, cracked their Wellspring open in a hurry and left a flaw in it, a tiny seam where essence would leak out for the rest of their lives, a ceiling they could never raise. A flawed Wellspring could not be fixed. You lived with the leak until you died. I had no intention of rushing. I closed my eyes and found the flow of raw essence within me, pulsing through channels I had spent weeks learning to feel. The ledger showed me the exact shape the Wellspring should take, every line, every angle, and I followed it. Slowly, deliberately, I opened the core where the Wellspring would sit. The sensation was cold first, like ice running the length of my veins, then bright and warm, spreading outward in a clean symmetry. Hour after hour I worked, forming channel after channel, each one aligned without a single flaw, sweat dripping from my brow while my hands stayed steady. Most men cracked their Wellspring open in a hurry and lived their whole lives with the leak. I had all the time in the world and a ledger to show me the shape, so I opened mine without a single flaw. When it was done, essence flowed through me brighter and clearer than ever, and my body ached to the bone from the cost of it. Wellspring realm reached. Foundation flawless. Old Bram laid 2 fingers across my wrist, tracing the new shape of me, and went quiet in a way that frightened me more than any shouting would have. A foundation like this, he said at last, elders dream of and never reach. With this, there's no ceiling you can't eventually pass. Every other disciple in this sect is already capped by an old flaw they'll never undo. He met my eyes. A foundation like this is worth more than your life to the right elder, and the wrong elder will simply take it, and no one will ask where the ash boy went. The fear in him was real and new, and it became mine. A perfect Wellspring in a charity orphan was not a thing the sect would celebrate. It was a treasure, and treasures, in the hands of the powerless, got taken. Within days, I felt the truth of it. A senior steward who had never once cared whether a charity disciple lived or died began asking me questions about my background, casual and friendly, with an edge under the politeness that made my skin crawl. Then I learned that someone had filed a sealed inquiry into my lineage, the kind of thing reserved for disputes among the powerful, my name set down on council parchment like an accusation. And over all of it, the sense of an attention settling on me from somewhere high in the sect, somewhere I could not see, weighing and measuring and cataloguing the ash boy who had risen too far, too fast. The ledger counted my effort as faithfully as ever. It could not tell me whose eyes were on me. So I made the only decision left. Visibility had been armor against a petty bully like Roderick. Against whatever this was, the only real safety was to be faster than the hand reaching for me, to climb so high so quickly that the cost of interfering with me grew higher than anyone wanted to pay. I pushed my training harder than ever, and the unease settled into my bones like frost anyway. I had wanted them to see me. They had. The trouble with being seen is that you cannot choose who is looking. Chapter 7, Kestrel. Kestrel found me at the technique hall, the way a cat finds the one warm spot in a cold house, unhurried, certain it was owed. I was running forms in the corner of the court when his voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. He stood a few paces off, flanked by 2 disciples who kept their distance with wary eyes. I've beaten everyone in this sect worth beating since I was 14, Kestrel said. It's deathly dull. He looked me over as if searching for something under the surface. Then a charity boy puts the air on his back. Spar with me, ash boy, bore me and I'll leave you alone forever. He was the sect's prodigy, ascended to Wellspring younger than anyone, trailing awe and resentment in equal measure. I'm not here for your sport, I said evenly. Why should I spar with you? His lips curled, but there was no malice in it, only a genuine, restless interest. Because you're the first person in years who might actually test me. He stepped closer. You've got something, even if you are a charity boy. It strung, and it was also the truest thing anyone in the high ranks had ever said to me. Fine, I said, I'll spar with you. We took a practice ring at the edge of the court. I wound my hand wraps and breathed. Kestrel drew his blade with a precision that was its own kind of language. The ledger flickered awake behind my eyes, ready to read every motion. "Begin," a passing elder called, and the spire opened with a clash of steel that rang off the walls. Kestrel circled me, his stance fluid and sure, and then he came in. He was faster than Roderick, more precise, every move calculated, controlled, no wasted motion to read. His blade swept in and I parried, the shock of it singing up my arms. He pressed, and I gave ground. "Show me something," he said, even-voiced, driving me back. I held, sweat sheeting down my face, and countered with a jab he blocked without seeming to think. He struck again, a feint left, a drive from the right. I sidestepped and grazed his lip, drawing a thread of blood. "Honest effort counted." "Not bad," he said, wiping it away, "but you're missing something." He was right. He was better than me, and for a long, frightening stretch he proved it, a flurry that opened a cut across my cheek and sent me retreating across the slick stone, my arms screaming, my vision narrowing to the next blade. I could not outfight him. I had only one thing he didn't. So I watched, and on the third pass of his signature technique, a spinning crescent strike, beautiful and overwhelming, the ledger gave me the truth of it. Technique observed, crescent whirlwind, one flaw found. There was a hair of overcommitment in the turn, a fraction of a heartbeat where the whirl left him open on the follow-through. The next time he spun into it, I was already moving, not to meet his blade, but to the place the flaw would leave bare. My blade took his mid-whirl and his balance with it, and the sword spun out of his hand and clattered across the flagstones. He was better than me, I want to be honest about that. He was faster, and he had years I didn't, and the only thing I had that he didn't was a thing in my eye that found the one place his perfect form came apart. Kestrel landed flat on his back, and he laughed. There was no resentment in it, no sulking, only delight, the pure pleasure of a man who has finally been made to try. He grinned up at me, robes dusted with sweat and grit. "You're hiding something," he said, eyes narrowing in playful speculation as I pulled him to his feet. "Good. A rival with no secrets is just a mirror. Keep it. I'll beat it out of you eventually." He brushed himself off, still grinning, and his expression softened a fraction. "You're not trash, Cael, not by a long way." It was rare for anyone in this place to say my name without contempt attached. Kestrel didn't pity me. He respected me, which was a thing I had no practice receiving. "Thanks," I said quietly. He clapped my shoulder. "Again tomorrow." And he meant it, a rival, where an hour ago I'd had an enemy. The contrast with Roderick, who had eaten the same stone and only hated me harder for it, was not lost on me. I found Myra in the herb kitchens that evening. She set a bowl of stew in front of me, but her face was serious, not warm. "Roderick stopped trying to fight you," she said quietly. "He's been going to Magister Drust instead, asking about you, and Drust has been asking the stewards." She held my eyes. "Roderick's a bully, Cael. Drust is something else." The name sent a chill down my spine, the cold elder, the attention I'd felt settling on me from somewhere high in the sect. It all fit now. "Do you know what he wants?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not even Roderick knows for sure, I think, but Drust is ambitious and powerful, and he's not asking the way a steward asks. He wants to know who you are, where you came from, why you've risen so fast." My lineage, not a grudge, something larger. I finished the stew in silence, its warmth no match for the cold settling in my chest. The real danger had never been Roderick. It was whoever Roderick had gone running to. Chapter 8, The Trials. The tiered trials decided everything for a year: who ate well, who trained where, who the sect bothered to remember, and I walked into them as a name people had only just learned. The dueling grounds sat below Greycairn stone battlements, ringed by the whole sect, the elders raised above on a high judging tier with their robes stirring in the chill mountain wind. Each match would set a disciple's rank for the year, resources, teachers, access. I entered unranked, my name passing through the crowd as a question, the ash boy, the newcomer no one expected to go far. And among the judging elders sat Magister Drust. He did not lean forward, did not speak. He simply watched, and his attention settled on the back of my neck like an icy pressure I could feel through the noise of the court. He was measuring me. He had been measuring me for a while. "The trials will make you impossible to ignore," Bram murmured from the sidelines. "Watch your back." I nodded, and my name was called. My first opponent was a tall, lanky disciple named Aldrich, eyes wide with nerves. He lunged with a basic thrust at my chest, and the ledger laid the floor bare before he'd finished the motion, his wrist weak, his hand trembling a hair before impact. I sidestepped, parried, and sent him sprawling with a clean counter. He scrambled up red-faced but holding his head high, and I gave him a nod before he went. There was no profit in grinding a nervous boy into the stone. Honest effort counted. My second was Ilara, quick and far more practiced, who circled me with calculating eyes and struck with real precision. We traded blows, each one weighed against the ledger's analysis, and her form was clean, but there was a hesitation in her footwork, a fractional catch when she shifted her weight to the right. Technique observed, one flaw found. The next time she shifted, I was already there. A lunge, a parry, her rhythm broken, and the decisive blow landed before she could recover. She blinked, then bowed with genuine respect and stepped back. My third was Varric, a seasoned disciple of several years, stronger and faster than the others, who came at me with a relentless flurry that drove me back across the slick stone and forced me to read on the fly. He was good. He made me work for it. But every exchange showed me more of him, and when he made one small slip, a misstep just before he disengaged from a lock, I struck without hesitation and put him on one knee. He looked up with a mix of awe and anger, and I nodded and stepped aside. The crowd's roar rose with each match, and the elders' frowns deepened just as steadily. On the far side of the bracket, Kestrel was carving through his own opponents, his victories drawing their own murmurs, and Roderick was winning too, hungry, his eyes finding me between every match. The same sect that had called me Ashboy a season ago now shouted my name. It was a strange, almost weightless vertigo, and I did not entirely trust it. "Cael, you were incredible out there," Myra called from the stands, flushed with fierce joy. I returned her wave without breaking stride. I found Bram at the edge of the court, leaning on a stone pillar, his gaze going up to the judging tier. "They cheer you now," he said. "Every cheer makes you worth more, and the man on that tier doesn't applaud things, he collects them." I followed his eyes to Drust, cold and still above the noise, his attention never leaving me. The cheering crowd and the watching elder were two sides of one coin, and I understood it. Every match I won made me a brighter prize, and a brighter prize is easier to decide to take. That evening, the bracket for the next round was drawn, and the whole sect buzzed with it, my name set against Roderick's in the marquee match. He walked toward me through the murmurs, upright and certain, and his essence carried an unusual sheen, a borrowed brightness that did not belong to a man at the fifth tempering. He had come back from his humiliation with something new in him. "You caught me off guard once, Ashboy," Roderick said, and smiled like a man who'd been promised a gift. "That won't happen tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll find out the difference between a fluke and a real cultivator." I met his gaze and kept my hands loose at my sides. It was not for me to boast. "Then we'll see," I said. He laughed, a hollow sound, clapped my shoulder in mock friendship, and walked away through a crowd that watched him go with unease. Bram came to my side, his eyes sharp on Roderick's back. "Something's different about him," he said. "He's been given an edge. Be careful what it is." "I know," I said, and I would be ready to read it, whatever it was. Above us, on the raised platform, Drust's gaze flickered to me one last time, unreadable, and then away. Tomorrow, before the whole sect, Roderick would play whatever hidden card his new patron had dealt him. And tomorrow, before the whole sect, I meant to finish what he had started in a woodshed 2 years ago. Chapter 9, The Heir. 2 years ago, this man had me beaten and locked in a shed to freeze, and now the whole sect had gathered to watch us settle it. The courtyard was a sea of faces under the high cold light, the elders ranked in their black robes on the tiered stands, their eyes sharp as knives. Magister Drust stood among them, cold and still. Myra caught my eye from the crowd and gave me a small nod. No shed to crawl into this time, Roderick said, his voice carrying easily over the assembled disciples. No cold to do my work for me, just you and me and everyone watching you finally fall. His confidence was back, and more than back, fed by whatever his new patron had given him. I said nothing to match the boast. The history between us was already in the air, the water steps, the assessment, the bar dropping into place. There was nothing left to say about it that the fight wouldn't say better. He lunged, and the crowd held its breath, and the fight began. It went badly at once. Roderick was wrongly, frighteningly strong, far beyond his realm, his essence surging with a borrowed brightness that made every strike land like a falling beam. He drove me back across the stone, his blade flashing faster than a fifth tempering had any right to move, and the blows I couldn't slip bruised through to the bone. Blood ran down my arm where an edge caught me. The crowd that had come to cheer me gasped, because for a long, real stretch, it looked exactly like the Ash Boy was about to fall after all. I gave ground and stayed alive and watched, and the ledger gave me the truth of him. The power wasn't his. I could see that now, borrowed, poured into a flawed vessel, already splitting the seams it sat on. He had been handed a weapon that was eating the hand that held it. Technique observed, borrowed surge. Foundation beneath it, cracked, one push will finish it. I stopped giving ground. The next time he committed a wild, overreaching strike, his borrowed surge flinging him past his own balance, I stepped into it instead of away. I took the impact on my forearms, wrenched him off his line, and drove a palm into his chest with everything the counted years had given me, turning the stolen power back down into the cracked foundation it had been stacked on. He had stolen a shortcut and called it strength, so I gave it back to him all at once and let everyone watch the shortcut come due. His essence guttered and tore. The borrowed surge collapsed inward, unspooling through the flaws it had been hiding, and Roderick's strength came apart in front of the entire sect, the prodigy unmade, the cheat unmasked, his stolen power bleeding out of him in a way no one watching could mistake for anything but what it was. He coughed blood and went down onto his knees on the cold stone. The crowd's roar curdled into silence, then into a low murmur as understanding moved through it. They had seen it. They knew now what he'd done and what I'd just laid bare. I did not kick him while he was down. I stood over the man who had thrown me in a shed to die, and I gave him the only thing that would land. You were stronger than me, I said quietly. You just never once earned it. Then I walked away, and that was worse for him than anything I could have done. The silence followed me across the courtyard. I had won the match, and more than the match, I had won the truth of it in front of everyone who had ever laughed, that I had built every scrap of what I was, and he had stolen his and broken on it. And then I felt the other eyes. Magister Drust had not moved. He stood apart from the murmuring crowd, watching me, and the thing in his face was not what it should have been. He was not angry that his pawn had been broken in front of the whole sect. Drust wasn't angry that his pawn had lost. He was smiling, the way a man smiles when a tool turns out to be sharper than he was promised. I met his gaze across the emptying ground and felt the cold of it climb the back of my neck. Roderick had only ever wanted to hurt me. This man wanted to understand me because I had just done something no disciple in the world should be able to do. I had seen a forbidden technique to its root and unmade it on sight, and the elder who had given Roderick that technique had watched me do it. I had revealed too much. I knew it the moment his eyes found mine. The bully was finished. The real danger had just woken all the way up, and it was smiling at me. Chapter 10, The Keeper. Winning the trials should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like I'd lit a lamp in a room I now realized was full of people I couldn't see. The Ashen Court had celebrated me, and the praise sat hollow over the thing underneath it. I had exposed a forbidden technique in front of the whole sect, and the cold elder on the judging tier had watched me do it. Roderick was finished. The man who'd given Roderick that technique was not. Honest effort counted. Old Bram drew me aside as the others basked in it, and we walked the silent halls. the stone cool underfoot, pine and wood smoke, and damp on the air. You saw his technique, Bram said, not a question. The whole of it, the one flaw in it. His face was grim. Only a handful of things in all the world can read a technique like that on sight. None of them should be sitting in a charity boy. Drust saw what you did. He will not rest until he understands it. He stopped walking, and something in him settled, the way a man settles before stepping off a height. It's time. The truth's too dangerous to keep from you any longer. He took me to the woodshed after dark, cleared a space on the cluttered floor, and set an iron lantern between us. From under his cot, he drew an old wooden box, scarred with years, and out of it a tarnished metal pendant, its surface carved with symbols that caught the lantern light and seemed to shimmer. "This is the emblem of our line," he said, and his voice, always so steady, trembled at the edge. "Generations ago there were those who believed in a different path, not the worship of born talent, the counting of honest effort and the rewarding of it, so that the diligent could rise as far as any prodigy ever born." I turned the pendant in my fingers, and the symbols seemed to pulse against my skin. "They didn't fear our weakness," Bram said. "They feared what would happen if the weak found out that effort, counted true, could carry them as far as any prodigy. So they burned us down to the last. I am the last student, and the ledger is ours. It came back for you." The cold ran down my spine, and under it rose something I had no name for: purpose, maybe, or belonging, the first I'd ever felt. "Why me?" I asked. Bram's smile was a bittersweet thing. "Because the day you first crawled into this shed, and I taught you that one form, the form with the flaw, the one only you ever bothered to fix, something in you answered. I have spent my whole life as the last of something, hiding as a man nobody looks at, waiting for the ledger to find a worthy hand again. It found yours." He told me where the rest of us had gone. "We called it the drowned spire," Bram said. "Everything we were still down there in the dark, sealed against anyone but one of our own. I have waited my whole life for someone who could open it. I had hoped to send a man. I have an ash boy and a week. A place sealed for generations in the deep mountains, holding the heart of my lineage and the source of the ledger itself." He pressed a tattered map into my hands, the lines worn soft. "Northeast," he said, "not far on foot but treacherous, guarded by wards no one but the bloodline could pass." And he said it knowing, as I did, that Drust was closing and the time we had was measured in days, not years. The summons came the next morning, with the bite of winter on it. A courier brought a rolled parchment sealed with the Magister's sigil, and I followed a servant through cold corridors to Drust's private chambers, stark white walls, dark furniture, deep blue tapestries woven with scenes of blood, frost on the windows, a fire low in an iron brazier. Drust stood by the hearth, robes perfectly tailored, hair neat despite the chill, a man who never had to raise his voice because he had never in his life been made to. "Cael," he said softly, and beckoned me to the chair across from him. He poured 2 cups of tea himself, with his own hands, which somehow made it worse. "What is it," he asked, "that you carry behind your eyes?" "I don't know what you mean," I said. His lips curled, without warmth. "Don't play coy. You're a clever boy. You must have wondered why a thing like you has never walked into this sect before." He let that sit, and then he set the offer down between us as gently as the teacup. "Talent like yours is a flame in a high wind," Drust said, pouring the tea himself. "It wants a hand around it. Mine, ideally. A boy with no family and no patron does not get to refuse the only shelter offered him, not twice anyway, so will you be sensible?" He had not said the word the ledger used. He did not need to. I could see in his eyes that he was circling the truth of me the way a wolf circles a fire, patient, certain, waiting for it to die down enough to step in. I kept my hands still around the cup he'd poured. To accept was a leash. To refuse, here, in his own rooms, might be the last thing I ever did, so I gave him neither. "I'll think on it," I said, and bowed, and stepped back toward the door. His patience followed me out like a cold pressure. The trap was set, and we both knew that whatever I answered, there would be a price, and that he would have the truth from me, or from the old man who held it, one way or another, before the new moon. Chapter 11, Drust. I said no to Magister Drust as politely as a man can say no to the thing that intends to own him. I went back to his chambers and refused his patronage, carefully, respectfully, but I refused, because accepting it would only be a slower way of disappearing. Drust took it with a smile that chilled me more than any anger could have. "As you wish, Cael," he said, and waved me out as though it were nothing. It was not nothing. By the next morning, the doors of the sect had begun to close, one by one, without a single raised voice. My stipend was docked with no explanation. Training sessions I'd been granted were cancelled or postponed indefinitely. Stewards who had bowed to me a week ago now found themselves too busy to meet my eye, and at the Ashen Court, the instructor would not look at me at all. "Your trials rank has been flagged for review," he said, and turned away. That was Drust's way. He did not need to strike me. He could simply close every door in the sect until the orphan had nowhere left to stand, and a fight I could win with technique was not the fight he was having. Then the whispers turned to accusations. A treasure had gone missing from the technique hall. A disciple was found hurt, with no clear culprit and every eye sliding toward me. And the evidence, it turned out, was me, my own rise made into the proof against me. How does an ash boy go from the bottom of the sect to the top of the trials in a season? The accusation went. He doesn't, not honestly. And the sect, which had cheered me a week ago, decided that was reasonable. The disciples who'd shouted my name now stepped around corners before I could reach them. I swept the technique hall under their wary eyes, each stroke of the broom a reminder of the honest labor that had become, in Drust's hands, the shape of my guilt. Myra slipped into the hall through the servant ways, soundless, and pulled me into a corner. "Drust's building a case against you," she said low, "but that's not the worst of it." Her eyes darkened. "He's taken Bram, seized him and the whole archive this morning." The cold went all the way through me. I went to the woodshed at a run. The door hung open, swinging in the wind. Inside was wreckage, scrolls and journals torn across the floor like dead leaves, the shelves Bram had tended for years standing empty, his broken lantern beside the scarred wooden box, spilled and stripped. They had taken every scrap of it. They had taken him. They had taken him and the archive both, and left the woodshed door swinging. Drust didn't want me anymore. He wanted what Bram knew, and he would take the old man apart to get it. The fury that had run cold in me since a night in this very shed came back, older and colder. Drust was not after my talent now. He was after the Spire, and the source, and the truth of the line, and Bram was the thread that led to all of it. He would unravel the old man to follow it. I went to Drust's chambers because I could not do anything else, and I learned exactly how far beneath him I stood. He didn't even rise from his chair. The air simply became a hand, and the hand put me on my knees, and I understood that everything I had, the ledger, the reading, the flawless foundation, was a knife brought to drown a man already at the bottom of the sea. Core realm, a full realm and more above my freshly opened wellspring, and he spent no more effort putting me on the floor than a man spends closing a door. I knelt there, the weight of him pressing the breath out of me, and for the first time since the woodshed I was wholly, helplessly outmatched. Technique meant nothing. Reading the floor in a thing meant nothing when the gulf in realm was this wide. "I will have the spire from your keeper by the new moon," Drust said. "The only thing still in question is you." He let the weight off me at last, and I knelt there breathing, and I did not waste my breath on threats I couldn't keep. I rose, slow, and walked out, and let him think he'd put me back in my place. But on the cold walk back, the helplessness burned down into something harder. He would have the spire's location from Bram by the new moon, so I would have to reach it first, get there ahead of him, take whatever waited at the heart of my lineage, and come back something he could not simply put on its knees with a thought. Days, not years. I had days, and I meant to use them. Chapter 12, Foundation. There was exactly one road left that didn't end with me on my knees, and it ran straight down into a drowned ruin I'd never seen. I found Myra in a servant corridor where we could speak unseen, the walls lined with disused shelves, light falling thin through the high windows. "We have to reach the drowned Spire," I told her. "Drust will force its location out of Bram within days. We get there first, or we lose everything." Her brow furrowed. "It's deep in the mountains, sealed with old wards, and you're barely Wellspring. How do you mean to survive the road, let alone what's at the end of it?" "By not being Wellspring when I leave." Her eyes snapped to mine. "I break into Foundation, now, tonight. Forcing a realm that fast tears you apart from the inside," she said, her hand tightening on my arm. "You know that." "I know." Drust was a full realm above me and climbing. A clean, slow foundation was a luxury for men who weren't being hunted. It's the only arithmetic that doesn't end with all of us dead. The ledger can give me the years. I just have to pay for them in one night. She didn't like it, but she'd done the same arithmetic, and there was no other answer in it. I went back to the woodshed, the rough mat, the old water yoke from my days as the sect's trash, and I forced the breakthrough into the third realm. Foundation is the laying of a foundation a cultivator stands on for the rest of his life, the careful work of years. I did it in a night. Form after form, each rep counted 100-fold, my muscles burning and my hands blistering on the rough mat, the count climbing while I held each stance past failure and corrected each flaw the ledger lit for me. By the small hours, my body felt like it might come apart at the seams, and I pushed harder, because the only thing worse than the pain was what waited if I stopped. As the sky grayed, I felt the shift, a tingling warmth spreading from my core, the channels widening further than they ever had, and the third realm opened under me. Clean, because my foundation had always been clean. And then the price came due. A sharp pain lanced through my chest, my heart slamming against my ribs, my whole body shaking on the mat as the breakthrough finished tearing through me. The ledger could give me the years. It could not give me a body that had lived them. So I bought the third realm in a night, and my body sent me the bill before the night was out. Foundation realm reached. Warning, the body has been carried past what it earned. There will be a price. I was still shaking on the mat when Kestrel found me. He could have stayed clear of it. A high-branch prodigy had no reason to bleed for a charity boy the sect had turned on. Instead, he crouched down across from me, took in the state of me, and didn't flinch. "I don't actually care where you got your talent," he said. "I care that Drust frames disciples and calls it order. You're the first interesting thing to happen here in years, Ash Boy, and I'm not going to let him bury you in paperwork. So, what's the plan?" It was not softness. Kestrel was proud and pragmatic to the bone, but he believed me over the accusation, and he despised a senior elder who cheated the very idea of the trials, and that was enough. The rival had become an ally, and for the first time in my life I had people, Myra in the servant ways, Kestrel at my side, and Bram in Drust's hands, waiting on me. "Buy me time and cover for me," I said. "Myra gets us Drust's movements, and then we go." The word came up through the kitchens that night, the way everything did. Myra found us in the dark of the lower court. "Drust will have what he wants from Bram by the new moon," she said, "and the charge against you is set to take you before then." Myra's word came up through the kitchens. Drust would have what he wanted from Bram by the new moon, and I would be in chains or in the ground by then too, which meant we left tonight or we lost everything. Every door in the sect was shut to me. Staying meant chains. Waiting meant Bram broken and Drust at the Spire ahead of us. There was nothing left to weigh. "Tonight," I said. Kestrel nodded. Myra was already moving toward the servant ways that would carry us out unseen into the deep mountains ahead of Drust's hunters, with the new moon counting down on an old man's life. I got to my feet, the foundation still raw and screaming in me, and followed her into the dark. Tonight or never. Chapter 13, The Spire. We went up into country the sect pretended didn't exist, where the trails gave out and the mountains got older than anything with a name. I trudged through the dark, my body still aching from the forced foundation breakthrough, the air thinning with every step. Kestrel led, light-footed and silent for all his pride, his eyes scanning the slopes for pursuit. Myra kept pace beside me, sharp and watchful, checking each turn before we took it. Any sign of them? I asked low. Nothing yet, Kestrel murmured, but Drust's hunters won't be far, don't get comfortable. The path narrowed and steepened until we were climbing hand over hand where the stone crumbled away. The land changed as we rose, the trails failing, the air biting at my lungs, the peaks around us growing ancient and wrong, the broken ruins of some forgotten age half swallowed by stone and shadow. It felt less like crossing distance than crossing time, leaving everything I knew behind to step into something older than the sect, older than its laws, older than the lie that the weak stay weak. Even afraid, even hunted, there was a strange ease among the three of us, a dry word from Kestrel where another man would have despaired, Myra's steadiness, my own stubborn legs carrying me up. I had gone into the woodshed 2 years ago with no one. I climbed into the dark now with people who had chosen to bleed for me, and I did not let myself forget what that was worth. Then the fog thickened, and the spire rose out of the black water ahead of us. It wasn't a tower standing. It was a tower drowned, the top of it breaking the black water like the spine of something that had lain down to die 1,000 years ago and never quite finished. A vast, ancient ruin half sunk in a still mountain lake, its upper reaches breaking the surface, the rest descending into water no living thing had touched in generations. The cold came off the lake in waves. The silence was its own weight. Kestrel stood beside me, his eyes wide despite himself. Myra moved to the water's edge, and her breath caught. The carvings around us were familiar in a way that chilled me, the lineage marks from Bram's archive, the same symbols he had walked me past, etched here into stone older than the sect itself. This was the heart of everything I had become, sealed and waiting, and it had been waiting for someone of its own blood for longer than anyone alive could remember. "The seal's here," Myra said. A stone archway jutted from the lake, slick and cold, its carvings glowing faintly under our lanterns, our lineage mark. "Can you open it?" Kestrel asked. "It's sealed by blood," I said, remembering Bram's words. "Only the line can break it. That's why no sect, no treasure hunter ever has." I drew the small blade from my belt. My heart hammered, and I thought of Bram saying the ledger had come back for me, and of an old man in a cell who had spent his whole life waiting for exactly this, and I cut my palm and pressed it to the stone. I cut my hand and gave the seal my blood, and the seal knew me the way nothing in my whole orphaned life ever had. The arcane symbols flared, brighter and brighter, and then settled, and the seal cracked open with a sound like whispers carried on wind. The black water drew back from a narrow stair, descending into the dark of the spire. The orphan who had never been anyone's son was recognized by blood as someone's heir, and the recognition went through me like warmth into frozen hands. Bloodline recognized. The spire opens to its own. And that was when the hunters caught us. The first shouts came down off the high slope, distorted by distance and echo, the clash of essence cracking off ancient stone. Drust's men closing fast, exactly at the worst moment. "Go," Kestrel said, turning to put himself between us and the slope. "Down now, I'm right behind you." We ran for the open stair as bolts of essence shattered against the rock. Myra went first, I came after, Kestrel last, loosing one strike up the slope to buy the seconds we needed, and then we were across the threshold, into cold, vast, ancient dark, and the drowned way closed behind us. The water sealed shut behind us like a held breath let go, and the hunters, and the daylight, and the easy way home were all on the wrong side of it now. The dark inside was absolute, broken only by a faint luminescence in the carvings along the walls, enough to see Myra's silhouette ahead and Kestrel at my shoulder, breathing hard, alive, all three of us sealed inside the heart of my lineage, with the hunters shut out and the easy way home shut off. "What now?" Kestrel asked, his voice echoing in the vast dark. I looked at the two of them, the friend who'd given me bread when I was nothing, the rival who'd chosen to bleed for me, and at the stair descending into the dark, where everything my line had ever been still waited. Bram was above us somewhere, in Drust's hands, the new moon counting down. The answers were below. "We go down," I said. "This is where it starts." And we went down, into the drowned dark, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 14, Descent. I had expected a tomb. What we walked into was a monument to people the rest of the world had decided didn't matter. The interior of the drowned spire was vast and silent, lamps waking to life as we passed, our feet splashing in the shallow water that had crept into the corridors over the centuries, and the carvings on the walls were unlike anything I had ever seen. They did not show heroes or prodigies. They showed ordinary people, a farmer at his plow, a blacksmith bent over his anvil, a soldier marching with nothing in his face but plain determination, no talent in their eyes. Only the steadfastness of those who had built something through sheer, counted work. Honest effort counted. Here was a whole people who had carved their farmers and smiths into stone the way Greycairn carved its champions, who had honored the diligent the way the rest of the world honored the gifted. I stopped before one carving, a man with a faded name still legible beneath it. Tom, a nobody in his time, like the ash boy I had been, honored here in stone for what he had built with his hands. The whole world had told me my whole life that work like that was worthless. These walls said otherwise, and the people who carved them had been hunted to the last for saying it. I understood, standing there, exactly what had been destroyed, and exactly why the strong had feared it enough to drown it. Kestrel took it in with wide eyes. Myra's gaze stayed steady and grave. Neither of them fully understood what they were looking at. Both of them felt it. The hall opened into a grand chamber, and across it lay a great formation, a swirling vortex of energy, pulsing with a rhythmic hum, barring the way deeper. "Is it a trap?" Myra asked, "meant to kill whoever comes?" "No," Kestrel said slowly, studying it. "It feels more like a test." He was right. I stepped closer and let the ledger take it in. Technique observed, one flaw found. The formation was intricate layered, and it would have turned aside any amount of raw power thrown at it, which was exactly why no sect had ever forced this place. But it was not built to be forced. It was built to be understood. There was a single misaligned node in it, a precise recalibration the lineage had left as a question for an heir. Kestrel tried to adjust it by hand, and the hum only rose. Brute skill wasn't enough. So I did what the formation was made for. I closed my eyes, let the ledger show me the true shape of it, and made the adjustments by insight rather than force. With each one the vortex settled, the hum softening, the swirling light slowing, until it dissipated entirely, and the way deeper stood open, and not one of us had taken a scratch. The spire didn't care how strong you were. It cared whether you could see true, which was the one test in all the world built for someone like me. The passage beyond grew colder and narrower, the floor slick, the ceiling low. We had not gone far when the stone overhead groaned and split, a section of the ceiling sagging, then cracking, the floor giving way beneath Kestrel where the passage had rotted through. He stumbled into the widening gap. Myra lunged for him and nearly went down with him. Honest effort counted. I didn't think. I let the ledger trace the floor, the cascade of structural weaknesses tearing through the old stone, and I poured my essence exactly where it showed me, bracing the failing arch, reinforcing the cracking floor with a precision no amount of brute strength could have managed. The weight of the collapse pressed down on me, my breath hitching, the foundation price flaring like fire through my limbs, and I held it just long enough for them to scramble back to solid stone. When the danger passed, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. The save had cost me, and the cost showed. "Thank you," Myra breathed. Kestrel said nothing, only met my eyes and gave a single nod, which from him was a great deal. I had spent my own years for the power that braced that ceiling, and I would have spent more. These two were the reason I had anything worth spending. I would not leave either of them behind in the dark. The corridor widened again into a chamber whose walls shimmered with runes, and a voice came out of the stone. Not a person, an echo record, a remnant left in the walls by those who had once lived here. "You are the heir," it said, grave and worn. "The ledger chose you." Grief moved through its ancient tone. The line fell. "The last master died alone, consumed, and he learned too late what you must learn in time." I stood still and listened to the last words of a murdered people. "The ledger gives back 100-fold," the voice said, worn thin as old cloth. "But it gives back everything, the pain with the strength, the loss with the gain. The last of us learned that too late, reached the heart knowing the count runs both ways. The warning settled into me, cold and heavy. The ledger had given me strength. It had never once given it for free. I knew that already, in my torn channels and my borrowed years. But this was something larger, and the record meant me to understand it before I reached for whatever waited below. Ahead, half sunk in still water, stood a heavy ancient door that seemed to pulse with a latent power. "The heart," I whispered. "Be ready," Kestrel said low. The echo record fell silent as we approached the threshold, leaving only the weight of its last warning. Whatever lay beyond that door would not just give. It would take too, and I had to be ready to let it. I stepped toward the door. Chapter 15, The Heart. The heart of the whole drowned world was smaller than I'd thought, and it was beating. The chamber at the center of the spire was cold stone and still water, the walls slick, the air thick with the smell of stagnant pools and decayed wood. And at the center of it, held in a dais of clear crystal, rested the hundredfold heart, the source of the ledger, the thing my whole line had been built around and had died protecting. I stepped closer, and the warmth of it reached me through the crystal, a strange comfort in all that cold. It pulsed, slow and steady, and my own ledger answered it like a key finding the lock it had been cut for. This was where everything I had become began. I stood at the origin of myself, and the pull to reach for it was almost more than I could hold. But the record's warning was still in my ears, and Bram's voice with it, and I made myself wait and understand before I touched it. The ledger showed me the truth of the heart, not a technique, not a flaw to be read, but the whole grave shape of what taking it would mean. Its interface unfolded the records of the last master before my eyes, years of effort and trial and triumph, and at the end of them, the moment he took the heart's full inheritance and what it did to him after. The heart did not make you strong for free. It counted the strength into you and counted the price out of you, year for year, weight for weight. The last master had paid in his own life, and it had still not been enough. I watched him in the ledger's cold record, once vibrant, then hollowed and aged beyond his years, his life dwindling with every burst of power he drew, until there was nothing left of him but an empty husk. The heart's gift was never raw power. The gift was that effort counts, and the heart was that truth carried to a terrible extreme, where everything counted into you, the pain with the strength, the loss with the gain, and years of your own life were the fuel that paid for it. Kestrel and Myra stood at the edge of the chamber, the orb's slow light on their faces. "Are you sure about this?" Kestrel asked, quiet. He was always the cautious one under the pride. Myra's hands were fisted at her sides. She had seen enough of what the ledger could do to understand exactly what I was about to weigh. I looked at them both, and I thought about the cost. Real years, mine, gone, a weight I would carry the rest of whatever life was left, and I thought about what it bought. "It costs years," I said, "mine." And I thought of an old man in a cell and a girl who'd given me bread when I was nobody, and I reached for it anyway, because some things are worth the years they cost. "Cael," Myra started. "I need to," I said gently, and that was the end of it. Kestrel put a hand on Myra's shoulder. "We'll be here," he said. I set my palm to the heart, and the inheritance came into me like a torrential flood, the full strength and knowledge of a murdered line pouring into my essence in an instant, the deepened ledger blooming behind my eyes, the realm walls ahead of me suddenly thin as paper. My body trembled under the sheer weight of it, every muscle strained to breaking. And the price came with it, exactly as the record had promised. I felt years go out of me, a part of my own life burning away to fuel the rest, the count that had always run into me now running out, grains of sand through a glass I could not turn back over. Something in me settled older, graver. The strength was enormous, and it was paid for, and I would feel the paying for the rest of my days. I came out of it changed, far stronger than the boy who had walked in, and marked permanently by what it had cost. When I straightened, my movements were heavier, more deliberate, weighted by everything I now carried. I turned away from the heart's empty crystal toward the way back up, toward Drust and Bram. I had spent years of my life in a single breath, eyes open, for the people waiting on me. I did not regret it. I only understood now what kind of weight a man carried when he chose to pay for what mattered instead of taking it for free. Inheritance of the Hundredfold accepted. The count runs both ways. The price is taken. Chapter 16, Betrayal. I came back up out of the dark, carrying the weight of years I'd just spent, and Drust was waiting at the water's edge with Bram on his knees. I had led us back toward the surface to go and free the old man. The trap was already closed. Magister Drust stood at the Spire's threshold, robes dark, eyes cold as ice, having forced the location out of Bram and brought him here as hostage and as bait, certain the heir would walk straight back into his hands. And beside Drust stood Roderick, hollow-eyed, his ruined cultivation barely held together, a manic gleam in him that had not been there before, the one who had guided the hunters, the one who had sprung the trap. "Welcome back, Cael," Drust said, dripping condescension. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd show at all." Bram knelt before him, bound and bruised and still defiant, his eyes finding mine across the cavern. "You should have stayed dead," Roderick said, his voice hollow with venom. "The broken heir had sold himself whole to the cold elder for one more chance at me, and the betrayal of it landed even though I had half expected it." "Let him go," Myra demanded, stepping forward. Drust only smiled. "I think not until the boy is mine." And then it closed for real. Drust's hunters came in from the dark behind us, and the cavern erupted into clashing steel and the cries of the wounded. Kestrel put himself between the line of them and us, his shield arm up, taking the assault so Myra and I would not. He was bleeding already, dark rivulets down his face. "Hold them," I called. He nodded once, grim and held, but there were too many. I cut toward him, the heart's strength surging through my limbs, faster and harder than I had ever moved, and it was not enough. Kestrel staggered under the relentless press, a fresh wound opening at his side. "Go," he rasped, forcing himself up on one knee. "Save Myra." Because they had Myra now, one of Drust's hunters had her, dragging her back toward the elder. I broke from Kestrel, unleashed a burst of essence that flung the hunter off her and got her to her feet, and behind me Kestrel went down to both knees, his shield arm dropping, blood soaking through his tunic. "Pathetic, isn't he?" Roderick said from his ledge, watching. "All that pride, and it couldn't even keep him standing." I had spent years of my own life for power, minutes ago, and I stood there in the middle of it and watched that power fail to protect the two people I had spent it for. The cost of caring is high. No one had ever told me how high. The fight stilled into a worse shape, Drust holding all of it, Bram bound, Kestrel down and bleeding, Myra at my side but cornered, and the elder, untroubled, a full realm above me, certain he had already won. "You spent your life for that power," Drust said, almost kind, "and now you'll hand it to me because I am holding everything you spent it to protect. This is what strength is for, boy. You were always going to lose it to someone who understood that." His Corelm mastery overshadowed me completely. My hands trembled, not from fear, from the effort of holding still. "Kestrel's hurt," I said through my teeth, "and Myra." "Your friends are expendable," Drust said. "When you have nothing to trade, yield the inheritance or watch them die." He stepped closer, certain, patient, the way a man is patient with a thing already in his trap. This was his ambition, finally bare. With the ledger and the Spire's knowledge, he would be untouchable. He would make the rule of talent absolute, with himself at the top of it, the exact tyranny my line had died opposing, walking around in a cold man's skin. And he believed, with good reason, that I could not stop him. Despair clawed up my throat. I was cornered, outmatched, everything I loved in the balance, and even the heart's borrowed strength was not enough to face a core elder head-on. Then Bram spoke, his voice steady though it cost him. "Let me go, Cael." He met my eyes across the stone and told me, without a word, to let him go. I decided I would rather break the world open than do that, and something in me started, right then, to break. Chapter 17, Core. I broke into the fourth realm the way a man breaks a door with his own shoulder, all at once, and bleeding for it. There was no crowd to see it, no measuring stone, only the cold dark of the Spire, Drust at the heart of it with Bram bound at his feet and Myra cornered and Kestrel down and bleeding on the wet stone. The breaking point had come, and I had decided I would rather break the world open than yield, and so I broke myself instead. "You're an ash boy," Drust said, certain, watching me strain. "You'll never cross that wall, not here, not now." He was right that it should have been impossible. The fourth realm, the forging of the essence core, was the careful work of years, and I had no years, only a torn body and a heart's inheritance screaming to be spent. So I spent it. I pulled in every ounce of focus, every form and stance and flaw I had ever read, and I poured the hundredfold count and the inheritance and my whole refusal into the wall at once. It was agony, like forcing myself through a needle's eye with boulders strapped to my limbs. The pressure built in my chest until I thought it would burst me open. And then the wall gave, and a true core formed at the center of me, clean, because my foundation had always been clean, forged in defiance in the one moment it could not afford to fail. Core realm reached, a true core clean forged. The price deepens, the count is kept. And the price deepened, more years gone in the breaking, the weight of them settling into my bones. But I rose up through the killing pressure Drust had been about to bring down on me, and for the first time I stood against him as something he would actually have to fight. The ledger sharpened my vision like a blade through mist, and I turned it on Drust himself, on his form, his stance, the perfect technique that had made him a name to fear, and I began, for the first time, to read him. For the first time, Drust looked at me the way a man looks at a wolf he thought was a dog. I was reading him now, and he knew it, and he stopped being patient. His calm shattered. The cold control that was more frightening than any rage drained out of him, and what came up underneath was genuine fury, that his prize, his ash boy, had crossed a full realm in a breath, and now stood looking at him the way he had spent his whole life looking at lesser men. "Enough," he said, and the word had teeth in it now. "It ends now." He came at me in earnest, and I learned the difference between an elder toying and an elder fighting. He was still the stronger, still the more refined, a core cultivator of decades against a core cultivator of minutes, and he drove me back across the wet stone, his blade a wall of steel, each exchange costing me, the heart's price flaring like fire through my limbs with every parry. But he could not put me down anymore. I could touch him now. I read his movements forming a heartbeat before they came, slipped what I could, took what I couldn't on my forearms, and gave ground only where the stone behind me wasn't Bram or Kestrel or Myra. I fought to keep my body between the elder and the hostages, and that cost me too. "Is this all you have?" Drust taunted, his blade ringing off mine. A scrap of borrowed power and a child's defiance. I didn't answer. Words were wasted breath, and I needed all of mine. The ledger hunted through his technique as we fought that flawless, devastating form, searching for the single place it came apart. But Drust was not Roderick. His perfection was decades deep, and the flaw, if it was there, sat far below the surface, and the ledger could not yet reach it. Roderick lunged from the side, hollow and desperate. I deflected him almost without looking, and he went sprawling, his strikes a ruin of what they'd been. "You'll pay for this," he snarled from the floor, and I had no attention left to spare him. "Bram," I called, taking Drust's next strike on a locked blade, the two of us grinding chest to chest. "I'll hold," the old man growled from where Roderick had failed to drag him. "Keep pushing." So I kept pushing. Each parry was a year spent, each block burned. Drust pressed me toward the hostages, and I would not let him reach them, and the fight climbed and did not break, the elder's perfect form turning in the dark, the flaw in it almost in the ledger's sight, and not yet, not yet. I held him off. That was all I could do, and it was costing me everything I had left to do it. Somewhere under the perfection, the truth of Magister Drust was waiting to be read, and I drove myself toward it through the steel and the dark, knowing that when I found it, it would have to be enough, because there would be nothing left of me to try twice. Chapter 18, Reckoning. Drust stopped holding back, and for the first time I saw why the whole sect was afraid of him. His signature technique unfurled in the dark of the Spire, a maelstrom of essence and precision that left no room for anything but awe. The cavern floor trembled. Essence swirled around me like an invisible storm, threatening to pull me under with every breath. "You think you can stand against a true core power?" He spat, and his movements were fluid, each strike calculated, the air cracking with raw force as he loosed wave after wave of it. I retreated, dodging strikes that sent shockwaves through the stone, my forearms trembling as I turned them aside, my muscles screaming. Behind me, Myra braced over the wounded Kestrel, Bram still bound at the cavern's edge. Drust's technique unspooled before my sight, a tapestry of flawless movement, every strike measured, every parry exact, no room for error in any of it. The ledger hunted through it, frantic, and found nothing. Technique observed, no flaw found yet. He drove me back to the wall, ancient stones splintering under the weight of me, pain blooming in my ribs. His power intensified with every strike, and for a long, real moment, it looked exactly like I would lose my chance, my allies, all of it slipping under his perfect storm. I held at the very edge of defeat, the ledger still reading, still searching the flawless form for the single thing that wasn't. And then it found it. The world dimmed to the unbroken line of Drust's technique, the way he drew essence into his palms, the angle of his stance, the arc of each strike, and the ledger turned the last page and showed me the flaw, a single seam of unbalance hidden so deep that only a man who had spent his life counting every drop could ever have seen it. Because the flaw was not in how he moved, it was in where the power had come from. It was the same flaw I'd seen in Roderick, only older and better hidden, power that was taken, not earned, sitting on a foundation that was never his. Drust had spent his whole life stealing shortcuts and calling the result perfection, and I had spent mine being counted, so I could see exactly where he was hollow. The ledger laid it bare, every borrowed fragment, every technique wrenched from a crushed rival, and beneath it all the oldest theft, knowledge looted from this very lineage, from this very spire, generations ago, by the faction Drust had risen through. His perfection was hollow exactly where it had been taken, every stolen piece stacked on a foundation that had never been his to stand on. The same disease he'd handed Roderick, refined across a lifetime and identical. I took a breath, centered myself, and struck, not at his power but at the seam. My blade met his with precision, not force, and his perfect form faltered for an instant, the hesitation of a man whose technique has just been asked a question it cannot answer. I was already moving. I drew him into the one committed strike his stolen perfection demanded, and I turned it back down into the hollow under it. Every drop of borrowed essence he wielded, I twisted against the foundation that could not hold it, so that the very act of taking became the thing that broke him. "Perfection," I said, as his storm guttered. "You stole it, Magister. You can't earn truth secondhand." He roared and committed everything to one last technique, and the seam widened under the pressure of his own borrowed power, and his perfect storm came apart in his hands, shards of stolen essence flying loose, the whole edifice collapsing inward like a house of cards in a wind. He had taken everything and earned nothing, and in the end, that was the only flaw that mattered. I put it through him the way you'd push a finger through rotten wood. Drust fell, his essence flickered out of him like a candle snuffed between two fingers, the stolen power that had carried him for decades draining away into the wet stone, leaving only the hollow man underneath. It was not a gloating thing. It was a reckoning, and it carried the weight of everything behind it, the woodshed, the water steps, the drowned monument to people who had only ever worked. Honest effort and true sight, undoing a lifetime of taken shortcuts. In the collapse, his hold broke. I reached Bram and tore the bindings off him, and the old man clutched my hand with both of his, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "Cael," he whispered. Kestrel lay nearby, breathing shallow but alive, his eyes fluttering open with disbelief and relief as Myra knelt to check his wounds. Roderick was gone, caught in the collapse of the thing he'd sold himself to, his last gambit come to nothing in the dark. The danger was over. And the cost of it settled onto me all at once. The torn body, the borrowed years gone out of me in the breaking, a weight in my bones that I knew now would never fully lift. I was older than I had been an hour ago, in a way that had nothing to do with the clock. I had won, and I had paid for it, eyes open, and I would not have traded the paying. The cavern fell quiet. The only sounds are ragged breathing and the drip of ancient water. Myra's hands worked steadily over Kestrel. Bram would not let go of my arm. The man who had thrown me in a shed to die was gone, and the man who had hunted my whole murdered line was gone with him, and the 3 people I had bled for were alive in the dark beside me. I let myself, for one moment, simply breathe. The storm had passed. The reckoning was complete. Chapter 19, Ascendant. We came down out of the mountains slower than we'd gone up, because I was carrying more than I had before, and not all of it was strength. The air outside the drowned spire was thick with mist and wet earth after the dead halls below. I came out into it with the others, Myra steady at my side, Kestrel walking weary but on his own feet, and old Bram free in the open for the first time in years. "You're different," Myra said quietly as we picked our way down the slope. I was, the weight of it showed, not just the scrolls and the truth I carried out of the spire, but the years the heart had taken, settled into my bones like a gravity that would not lift. I told them the rest of it on the road home, the lineage, the heart, the cost. Bram listened, and at the end of it only nodded. "A weight to bear," he murmured, "but a legacy worth carrying." The road back was its own kind of trial, but an honest one, no wards, no tricks, only the raw effort of putting one foot ahead of the other. And there was a quiet bond among the 4 of us that had not been there going up, people who had gone into the dark together and come back out. Greycairn was thick with whispers when we reached it. Without Drust, his faction had crumbled, his lies lying exposed in the daylight, and the framing against me had unraveled with him. Grandmaster Thorn came to meet me alone, his eyes steady and weary. "The sect owes you a great deal," Grandmaster Thorn said, and I understood he was offering me the kind of power that had made Drust what he was, a high seat, the ranking committee, a hand on the future of Greycairn itself. I had just spent years of my life learning what that power costs, so I said no. Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Because it's what Drust would have done," I said. "Power like that hollows a man out. I've watched it happen twice now." He was quiet a long moment. "You are right," he said at last, and there was regret in it. "I've seen it happen more than twice in my years here." He paused. "But you've proven yourself beyond measure. Take something, a seat, a title, the respect you're owed." "No seat, no title," I said, "but I'll help put right what Drust left broken." It was the most I would let myself hold, and I would hold even that with a wary eye, because the whole lesson of the Spire was what power did to the men who reached for it. I found Roderick at the edge of the grounds, near where the old woodshed had stood, slumped and gaunt in ragged clothes, his cultivation broken and scattered. He looked up at me with dull eyes. "I don't know where else to go," he murmured, all the arrogance gone out of him. The old Cael, the ash boy, might have wanted to finish him. I found I didn't need to. He had done all of it to himself. The water steps, the assessment, the woodshed, the bargain with Drust, and the betrayal that followed, and the small, diminished life ahead of him was a heavier sentence than anything I could lay on him. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm not going to do anything to you," I told him. "You did it all yourself. That's the difference between us, it always was." And I left him there, and I didn't look back, and that was the end of it. That evening I sat with Bram in the neglected woodshed, where 2 years and a whole life ago I had been left to die. "The line lives," Bram said, and there was a relief in his face I had never seen there. He had spent his whole life as the last of something, hiding as a man no one looked at. Now there were people, Myra, Kestrel, the truth out of the Spire, who knew what we were and why it mattered. "They burned us down because we told the weak the truth," I said to Bram. "So I'm going to keep telling it. That's what the ledger's for, not for me, for the next ash boy who thinks he doesn't count." Bram's gaze was steady. "The line lives," he said again, like a man laying down a weight he'd carried alone for 40 years. Myra sat with us, and Kestrel, recovering, his wounds bound, the rival who had become a friend. They were not just allies anymore. They were the family the ash boy had never had, the thing I'd have spent every year of my life to keep, and nearly had. I thought back to the drowned monument, the farmers and smiths carved in stone, honored for what they'd built with nothing but counted work. That was the truth. The strong had burned a whole people to bury. It hadn't stayed buried. It had found an orphan in a woodshed, and now it would walk back out into the world in him. "You've done what no one else could," Kestrel said, his voice still rough from the spire. "I'm going to carry it forward," I said, more to myself than to any of them. Not to rule and not for revenge, to show people written off as ash that they were only ever uncounted. That effort, counted true, can lift anyone as far as any prodigy ever born. The weight of the ledger settled into me, not the burden of the price now, but the shape of what it was for. True strength, I understood at last, was never in ruling over the small. It was in handing the count to the next person the world had decided didn't matter. Chapter 20, The Hundredfold Path. I left the Greycairn Sect on a clear morning, by the front gate, in daylight, which is not how I had ever once imagined leaving it. I had come through that gate 2 years before, a dirty orphan pressed against the wall by Roderick and his cronies, let in with nothing but charity and curses. I walked out through it now in a clean robe, my hands no longer raw from the water yoke, my back straight. The iron bars caught the low sun. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, and I took a breath of the cold morning and felt the essence move easy through me. Behind me the training yard stretched out like an old wound that had finally begun to close. 900 steps. The ashen court where I had once stood at the measuring stone and watched it show nothing. It was only a memory of hardship now, a place that had buried me and by accident made me. I felt no need to settle any score with it. The sect had paid its price in ways it never intended, and I was done collecting. I had said my goodbyes the night before, under the old oak by the woodshed. Bram had been waiting for me there, in clean, mended robes, moving with a grace I had never seen in the stooped shed-keeper I'd first met. The spire was safe. The knowledge was safe. The line had an heir at last, more than one now, because Myra and Kestrel knew the truth of it too, and would carry it whether or not I was there to carry it with them. "I spent my whole life as the last of something," Bram said, looking at the three of us in turn. "Thanks to you, I get to spend the rest of it as the first of something instead." The words hung in the lamplight, heavy with hope. Myra's eyes were bright. Kestrel, recovered now, the stiffness still in his movements, gripped my forearm the way a rival grips a man he has decided to keep. "We wouldn't be here without you," he said. "You'll all carry it now," I told them. It was never going to be just me. And that was the truth, and it was the best thing I had ever been able to say. The path out of Greycairn wound through a narrow defile, stone walls rising on either side, the air clean with pine and earth. Every step I took was deliberate, every rock underfoot a small proof of the road I'd walked. My hands were calloused, my arms strong with years of repeated effort, and every scar of it told a true story. Ahead lay a world I had only heard of. Highmark, with its grand spires and crowded markets. Other sects, other orders, each with its own laws and its own walls. The Ascendant realm I now stood at the threshold of, and above its sovereign, and above that immortal, names whispered by people who had never seen them, let alone reached them. The world was enormous, and most of it I would never see, and that was fine. Because the bigness of the world was not the same as an unfinished story, and I had finally learned the difference. The world was not finished, it never is. But my story, the one that started with a boy who didn't count, was. There is a difference between a road that goes on and a story that isn't done, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly which one I was walking. I was not stepping into a cliff's edge with everything still hanging. I was stepping into a life freely chosen, with nothing left unsettled behind me. The man who threw me in a shed was finished. The man who hunted my line was finished. The truth of what I was and what I would do with it was mine and known. Every debt was paid. Every question I had carried up those 900 steps had an answer now. I paused once at the edge of the training yard, where Roderick had first made me run the falling ash form wrong, and I let the memory pass through me without weight. Hours in a cold woodshed, each breath strained, each stance held past the point of pain. The ledger there the whole time, counting. Somewhere behind my eyes, the ledger was still counting, the way it always would now, quiet, patient, keeping faith with every step. I walked on into the morning, onto the open road. The ash boy was gone for good. the man remained. I had been the waste of the Greycairn Sect, the boy who did not count. Now every step I took was counted 100-fold, and every single one of them was mine. The road ran on a long way into the morning, and so would I, but I was no longer in a hurry, and I was no longer afraid, and there was nothing left behind me that I had not finished. I had counted, in the end. That had always been the whole of it.